In the book, Finding Your Way, Gary LaFerla tells an amazing story gleaned from the records of the United States Naval Institute following the Second World War. The USS Astoria engaged the Japanese during the battle for Savo Island before any other ships from the U.S. naval fleet arrived. During the crucial night of the battle, August 8th, the Astoria scored several direct hits on a Japanese vessel, but was itself badly damaged and sank the next day. Here's how LaFerla tells the rest of the story. About 0200 hours, a young Midwesterner, signalman 3rd Class Elgin Staples, was swept overboard by the blast when the Astoria's No. 1 8-inch gun turret exploded. Wounded in both legs by shrapnel and semi-shock, he was kept afloat by a narrow life belt that he managed to activate with a simple trigger mechanism. At around 0600 hours, Staples was rescued by a passing destroyer and returned to the Astoria, whose captain was attempting to save the cruiser by beaching her. The effort failed, and Staples, still wearing the same life belt, found himself back in the water. It was lunchtime, picked up again, this time by the USS President Jackson. He was one of 500 survivors of the battle who were evacuated to Noumea. On board the transport, Staples, hugging that lifebelt with gratitude, looked at that small piece of equipment for the first time. He scrutinized every stitch of the lifebelt that had served him so well. It had been manufactured by Firestone Tire and Rubber Company of Akron, Ohio, and bore a registration number. Given home leave, Staples told his story and asked his mother, who worked for Firestone, about the purpose of the number on the belt. She replied that the company insisted on personal responsibility for the war effort and that the number was unique and assigned to only one inspector. Staples remembered everything about the lifebelt and quoted the number. There was a moment of stunned silence in the room, and his mother spoke. That was my personal code that I affixed to every item I was responsible for approving. End of quote. I can only imagine the emotions within the hearts of mother and son as they pondered the convergence of responsibility and its impact on life. The threads had come together in an inescapable way. The one who gave him birth and whose DNA he bore gave him rescue in the swirling waters that threatened to take his life. If an earthly parent, playing the role of procreation, can provide a means of rescue without knowing when and for whom that belt would come into play, how much more can the God of all creation accomplish? By His sovereign will, we have come into being with an expressed and designed purpose. To be able to accept the wonder and the marvel of one's own personality, however flawed or accidental, and place it in and trust it to the hands of the one who made it is one of the greatest achievements in life. His, quote, registration number, unquote, is on you. Your DNA matters because the essence of who you are matters, and whose you are by design matters. Every little feature and accident of your personality matters. Consider it God's sovereign imprint on you. The often heard comment, "A face only a mother could love," reflects more fact than cynicism. God loves you as one who loves his own offspring. Your face is unique because your DNA is unique. When you finally meet the one who made you and examine the lifelines he has sent you along the way, you will at last understand how every detail made sense in the swirling reality of life's blessings and threats. They will speak of God's transcending love for you. Some time ago, I had the privilege to speak at a conference at Johns Hopkins University on the theme, "What Does It Mean to Be Human?" Before my address, Francis Collins, the director of the Human Genome Project and the co-mapper of human DNA, presented his talk. He spoke of the intelligibility and marvel of the Book of Life, filled with more than 3 billion bits of information. In a strange way, he became both the subject and object of his study, both the designer and the design of his research. Extraordinary thoughts swarmed within me as I listened, virtually tuning in and out of the talk in order to reflect on the wonder of it all. In his last slide, he showed 2 pictures side by side. On the left appeared a magnificent photo of the stained-glass rose window from York Minster Cathedral in Yorkshire, England, its symmetry radiating from the centre, its colours and geometric patterns spectacular. Clearly, a work of art, purposefully designed by a gifted artist. Its sheer beauty stirred the mind. On the right side of the screen appeared a slide showing a cross-section of a strand of human DNA. The picture did more than take away one's breath. It was awesome in the profoundest sense of the term, not just beautiful, but overwhelming, and it almost mirrored the pattern of the rose window in York Minster. The intricacy of the DNA's design that pointed to the transcendent one astonished those who are themselves the design and who have been created semi-transcendent by design. We see ourselves only partially, but through our Creator's eyes, we see our transcendence. In looking at our own DNA, the subject and the object came together. The audience gasped at the sight, for it saw itself. The design, the colour, the splendour of the design left everyone speechless, even though it is this very design that makes us capable of speech. Because of this design, we can think in profound ways, but we felt paralyzed by the thought and could go no further. Because of that design, we remained trapped in time, but were momentarily lifted to the eternal. Because of that design, we were capable of love and suddenly could see the loveliness of who we are. We can map out the human genome and in it see the evidence of a great cartographer. We can plan and now see a great planner. We can sing and now see poetry in matter. We speculate and see the intricacies of purpose. We live, seeing the blueprint of life, and we die, but we can look through the keyhole of life. At Johns Hopkins that day, we saw the handiwork of the one who made us for himself, and we grasp its splendor. We find the greatest joy of all to be the truth that every thread matters and contributes to the adornment of the bride and of the one who became flesh for us and dwelt among us. The day that each person willingly accepts himself or herself for who he or she is and acknowledges the uniqueness of God's framing process marks the beginning of a journey to seeing the handiwork of God in each life. Trying to mirror someone else's accomplishments is one thing. Trying to be someone else in distinctive capacity is unhealthy and breeds insatiable hungers. Not everyone is a Bach or an Einstein, but there is splendor in the ordinary. The mother who made the life belt is worthy of recognition equal to Bach. Her labor of love is as unique as discovering E equals mc squared, Einstein's famous formula. This is why seeing oneself through God's grand design is essential to completing the picture for all of creation. We must have a healthy respect for our individuality, but also keep a wise distance from it. We have it now, but it is not what we shall be. C.S. Lewis, in his brilliant way, reminds us of this. Quote, "Most of man's psychological makeup is probably due to his body. When his body dies, all that will fall off him, and the real central man, the thing that chose, that made the best or worst of this material, will stand naked. All sorts of nice things which we thought our own, but which were really due to a good digestion, will fall off some of us. All sorts of nasty things which were due to complexities or bad health will fall off others. We shall then, for the first time, see everyone as he really was. There will be surprises." End of quote. At the beginning of this chapter, I mentioned that my father-in-law did something utterly unforgettable in the final days of his life. As strength was leaving his body, and he could no longer communicate with loved ones, he suddenly opened his eyes and said twice, quietly and clearly, "Amazing. It's just Amazing. A few hours later, he again stirred, reached out his thin arms to his wife of 62 years, and said, "I love you." Then he let his head drop back on his pillow. Those were his last words. Within 24 hours, he was gone. That was the end. Or was it the beginning? When you know the Grand Weaver, it is neither. It was a punctuation mark in the design that he was about to see and enjoy forever. Accepting and celebrating the thread of your own personality is the first grasp of the Grand Weaver's design in your life. You are not a number. He knows you by name. Every stage of the process may not look picturesque, but every detail will come into focus and possess its share of beauty.